Welcome, SFL Nation, to the SFL presented by APM Music Schedule Release Show. Alongside Marcus Dunhill, James Klein, and James Richards, I am Cameron Irvine. And we are all set tonight. A beautiful occasion. And no troll job this evening. Welcome to the chat room. Bit W4342K, AJ Pick 6, Crunox, Eric JDWA, Ocho11, Dylan Roland 40, R. Cochran, Jason 1347, LB29, and many, many more. I'm a FM Problem subscribing with Twitch Prime. Missed some subscribers earlier. The JDR Project, Suicide King, all there. Xander Gold, X Factor 56, Plague 7, AJ today, Jackson here as well, the new rookie, True KJ5. That's Kentez Johnson here as well. So is Ram Voice, and so is our panel. Let's bring in first our panel, the owner of the SFL Indianapolis. I almost said Indianapolis Red Devils, but that is no more. James Richards, welcome to the program.
Thank you, sir. How are you?
I'm great. How are you, buddy?
I'm surviving, ready to get this show on the road.
How's the baby, Leonidas?
Oh, man, handful. Literally, I mean, he's not bad. Cries, sleeps, wakes up, eats, goes back to sleep, so it's not so bad.
Nice. Owner of the Carolina Skyhawks, James Klein. How you doing, James?
I'm doing well. How are you doing, James?
I'm going to have to call you guys Klein and Richards tonight because you got too many James on the program. I'm surprised my name isn't James at this rate.
It's never too late.
All right, James Dunhill. Marcus Dunhill, Atlanta quarterback. Also with us on the program. How you doing, Marcus?
I'm doing good. You beat me to the joke. I was just about to say I'm going to change my name to James for next season.
Sorry about that. Didn't mean to steal your thunder. Welcome, everybody, to the SFL Schedule Release Show, one of the most exciting nights of the offseason, and we're going to let you know how this is going to work. First, we're going to talk about opening week. Well, first we're going to unveil the whole schedule to you on the screen, although it's going to be quite small because there are a lot of games. We will use Schedule Zoom technology to talk about opening week. And then we'll go through the Friday Night Lights, and Saturday is Rivalry Night schedule. That's right. You heard it here first. Sunday night is Rivalry Night, moves to Saturday night, and the Fan Night Game of the Week moves to Sunday night as a new Monday slate of games has been created. Each analyst will pick a matchup they're most excited about. Then we'll move to Week 13, where we'll take a look at some of the potential defining moments in the regular season. And then we will start breaking down team schedules according to the amount of votes that were received from the reactions earlier today. The Chicago Wildcats winning that reaction. So Chicago will get their schedule after Alaska. All right, panel, we ready?
Let's do it.
Ready as always.
I'm ready.
The SFL Season 12 schedule is upon us, and the opening week matchups include opening night, Alaska hosts the Baltimore Vultures. Friday night, the first Friday Night Lights game of the season. It'll be a battle between the number 1 and the number 2 picks in the upcoming SFL Rookie Draft, as Dallas will travel to St. Louis. Saturday afternoon, before NFL playoff games, Oklahoma City and Tulsa renew their Oklahoman rivalry. The Sunday slate, all in the evening, headlined by New Orleans at Houston, as the Pharaohs look to get revenge on the Hyenas for bouncing them out of the playoffs. Also, Atlanta takes on Vancouver in Canada. Mexico City travels to Carolina. Denver is at Indianapolis. Monday is highlighted by Queen City at Chicago, a rematch of one of the better games in the regular season from Season 11 on that final night of action. Sioux Falls also travels to Las Vegas, and London is at San Francisco. A closer zoom in of the first 2 weeks, and I will start with James Richards. And first off, your take, Richards, on the opening night matchup between the Vultures and the Storm.
Yeah, I think that's a really tough opening game for anybody to play. You know, Baltimore having to travel to the I and take on the back-to-back defending SFL champions. But, you know, and it's not the easiest thing. If you're the defending champs, you may have that, you know, we've won 2, we may have a slight hangover, and you're going against a Hall of Fame coach in Paternity. So it's just a really tough opening night. I'm excited for it, and I can't think of a better way to open up season 12 than to see these two teams going at it on Thursday night.
What do you think, Marcus?
I think this is going to be an amazing game. As they had said before, Alaska is the back-to-back champs. However, Baltimore is not an easy team to beat, so this is going to be an interesting challenge where Baltimore might have a slight advantage that they get to take on the defending champs before anybody shows their cards in the league. It's the very first game. So if they play strong and play their cards right, I think Baltimore has an extremely good chance to win that game. So I think it's going to be anybody's game, and it's going to be great to tune in and find out.
James Klein, you're very familiar with the Vultures. How do you think they fare opening night as the back-to-back champions raise another banner?
Well, there's a couple things I think. First of all, what will the weather be up there? You know, you got the snow, possibly. Alaska, it's known for being cold and snowy. Also, how will, Mike Dazza, will he be a dazzling quarterback even in a perfect storm?
And the perfect. Go ahead, James.
I apologize. And that's a great point that Mr. Klein just brought up, is that this whole season, the cold weather teams, there's a higher chance that they're going to be playing in the snow and in not perfect conditions. And, we see Alaska, they're talking about adding a running back to their roster in anticipation of the inclement weather. So it'll be interesting to see how much weather plays a factor in Alaska's schedule this season, especially week 1.
So looking at the rest of the week 1 slate, what game stands out to you guys? And we'll go around the panel, and we'll start with Marcus. Which game elsewhere sticks out to you?
So the game that sticks out to me for week 1 is definitely going to be that Houston versus New Orleans matchup. Houston and New Orleans faced each other twice last season. Each one got a win out of it. However, the second to last week of the year, the week 12, Houston and New Orleans faced each other again, and New Orleans lost, and that loss is what put them spiraling out of the playoffs. So I'm sure that's been sitting with them all off season. Now they get the chance to take revenge the very first week of the year, and I would not be surprised if New Orleans comes out swinging. So that's going to be very interesting for me to watch as we go forward with week 1.
Where are you going, Mr. Klein?
Well, rumor has it that Sensei Shan Miyagi Varner will be serving sake to all the Chicago fans if there's a victory of the Queen City. So I'll be there if that happens.
All right, Mr. Richards, what is yours headliner for week 1 outside of opening night?
I'm going to have to go with Mexico City at Carolina. Mr. Klein knows all too well. They've gone through a lot of turnover this offseason. Towards the end of the season, they kind of were trending downward where they started out red hot. I think if they can get a week 1 win against a strong team like Mexico City, it'll set up the rest of the season for them.
All right, thanks for everybody. Let me know that the audio is A-OK. That is a look at week 1. Now let's go back to the full schedule and go over the Friday Night Lights and Saturday night is rivalry night games. One more note about Baltimore and Alaska. It'll be the first time that Mighty faces T-Pat since Thomas Paterniti was the owner of the Minneapolis Maulers, and Max Paul was the defensive coordinator in Baltimore, and that game just so happened to go to overtime. Anyway, Friday Night Lights schedule the rest of the way. Week 2, it's the Ghost Game Part 2. Atlanta hosts New Orleans as Aaron Arrington returns to the scene of his lethal crime. Friday, January 18th, it's the championship rematch. Alaska at Tallahassee. It also serves as the Pride home opener. Week 4, London and Indianapolis, 2 teams that brought in new coaches mid-season. Both teams showed improvements. They've now had a full offseason to work, and that will be a critical game in Indy. Week 5, New Orleans is at Vancouver. So a good test for 2 teams that fell just short of the playoffs last season, and a good barometer of where their season 12 might be going. Week 6, Dallas at Tallahassee. Here's an interesting thing about Dallas at Tallahassee. First off, Dallas has played Tallahassee twice and has won both games. The Pride have never beaten the Lobos. Second of all, this is Dallas's first time to Tallahassee in the 6 seasons that Dallas has had a franchise. They've never been to Florida, despite being in the same sort of geographical region. So Dallas will get the test at Florida in week 6. Week 7, Vancouver goes to Las Vegas. They only met once last year. They'll get to do it again in Sin City the day after Valentine's Day. No love lost there. Week 8, Carolina's at Tulsa. It's the first time that Carolina and Tulsa have played since the Hail Mary game when Tulsa won on the game's final play, and what people are still debating whether or not Corey Jones was in or out of bounds. Week 9 starts the March calendar. Sioux Falls is at Queen City, and that's always a big matchup. Most of the time, those two teams are playing in the playoffs now. They'll play in the regular season. Week 10, Tallahassee is at Houston in a rivalry game that sets the stage for Friday night as the Hyenas and Pride go at it. Week 11, Mexico City is at Baltimore. Oh, that's always a good one, always a classic. Week 12, Alaska's at Queen City, a critical game down the stretch. And then week 13, a bunch of games that we just simply have no idea where they're going. So that's a look at the Friday Night Lights schedule. And before I go into the Saturday night is rivalry night schedule, I want to get thoughts on that Friday Night Lights look around the league. Let's start with James Klein. Which of all of those beautiful matchups catches your attention?
Well, you go back to October 8th when London and Indianapolis faced each other. That was a 35-27 point game. Both teams is throwing the ball all over the place. That's a January 25th matchup, and that's the one I just circled on my calendar.
All right, how about you, James Richards?
I'm going to have to go with the Sioux Falls Queen City matchup. I think those two teams historically have always been battling for playoff positioning, and I think that game right there could, if both teams are kind of 6-6 or halfway 500, that game right there could tip each other's playoff chances.
All right, Marcus, what catches your eye on the Friday Night Lights schedule?
For the Friday games, I'm definitely going to take Week 11, which is Alaska at Queen City. The unique thing about that to me is those teams haven't played since the regular season of Season 10. So a lot of things have changed since then. Mighty's rebuilt that team a number of times, and Queen City has been a very tough team. I'm super excited to see what happens when Queen City gets another go at Alaska. Like you said, it's going to be a big game for both those teams along the stretch, and it'll be a good spot to see where they're at the end of the season. And from my research, it looks like they've only played that one time in Season 10 where the Storm got the win. So I'm excited to see what Queen City's going to do with the second time they get a chance to play.
The Saturday night is rivalry night schedule. Starts with a couple of afternoon games due to the NFL playoffs, but still rivalries nonetheless. Oklahoma City and Tulsa. Chicago at Mexico City. You wonder, they're not really known for rivals, but remember, the last time Chicago played Mexico City, Shan Varner's son kicked the game-winning field goal against his father, and the reports are that he was sent to his room. They will play each other again for the first time since then in Week 2. Week 3 is Houston and Mexico City. The Hyenas and Aztecs played a thriller last season with the Hyenas winning on the final drive, and I believe that will be the 10th meeting, according to my notes, between the Hyenas and the Aztecs. Week 4, Alaska is at Sioux Falls. It's their only meeting. It could be a snow game in January in South Dakota. We just never know, and that matchup is always fun. Alaska's had their number of late, but do not sleep on the Sparrows. Week 5, Tallahassee's at Baltimore. If you remember way back in SFL history, the Tallahassee Pride and Baltimore Crabs played an insane playoff game in which DR Sim absolutely went off in a loss to the Pride, the Vultures. And now it's also important to note, remember, Thomas Paternitti was the offensive coordinator in Tallahassee for a season, and now is over in Baltimore. So a little bit of a brewing rivalry there. Week 6, Houston is at Oklahoma City. These two teams have played some crazy games. This is the 7th meeting and the 3rd in Oklahoma City's house. Week 7, Tallahassee is at Mexico City. The Pride and Aztecs have been going at it since Season 5. Week 8, Tallahassee's at Alaska. If you don't think this is a rivalry now, just wait until they have played a third time in week 3 and now goes back to Alaska in week 8. That's going to be fun. That is must-see television. Week 9, Alaska's at Mexico City. Does it get any better than the Storm and the Aztecs? Week 10, Queen City is at Baltimore. It's the first of 2 meetings in the last 4 weeks between the Corsairs and Vultures. Baltimore had their number last year. We'll see if Queen City can conquer B-more. Week 11, Vancouver is at Denver. It's the first of 2 meetings in the final 3 weeks between the former offensive coordinator of Vancouver and the current owner of Vancouver, Andy Hamilton. So Andy Hamilton and Jeremy Vega will get well acquainted with each other in Week 11 and Week 13. And then finally in Week 12, Las Vegas is at Sioux Falls, a rematch of the wild card Wednesday playoff game from this previous season. All right, lots to digest. Let's start with Marcus, your favorite rivalry game on the schedule.
So my favorite rivalry game on the schedule is going to be the Week 7 game between Tallahassee and Mexico City. It's a rematch that we got of the playoff game just this season, where the Pride was able to beat the Aztecs by 13-10, and knock them out of the playoffs. The interesting thing about that particular playoff game was that the Pride ended up holding the Aztecs to 71 passing yards and 107 rushing yards. In comparison to the Aztecs game the week before against Baltimore in the playoffs, they had 313 passing yards and 171 rushing yards. So the Pride really held them down in that playoff game, and I'm really excited to see if Ramos is going to be able to find a way to move that ball in the Pride. So I think that's going to be a really good game to watch.
James Klein, what tickles your fancy?
Well, you stole my thunder on the Tallahassee, Baltimore, because I do remember the DRCM blowing up. So you're looking at Saturday, February 2nd. That's the game I'm watching. I mean, I love both of the guys to death. Me and Frank's come pretty close, and I'm actually going to pull for the Pride.
Wow, you've heard it here first. My goodness. James Richards, who's on your docket?
I'm going to go Week 9, Alaska at Mexico City. Alaska's had Mexico City's number the last few meetings. It'll be interesting to see the Storm travel to Mexico City after, Mexico City kind of went through a rebuilding year. This year, they should be in prime position to return to Season 9 form.
Week 13, let's zoom across the SFL because these matchups are the most critical as we get into the final week of the season. Houston is at Alaska. It is their only meeting, but Houston probably dodges a bullet by not getting Alaska early and potentially in the snow. They play them Sunday, March 31st or Monday, April 1st. Chicago is at Tallahassee. Baltimore is at Queen City. Again, the second of 2 matchups there. Sioux Falls is at Indy. Tulsa is at Vegas. London is at New Orleans. Denver at Vancouver. St. Louis at Atlanta. And Oklahoma City at Dallas. A few repeats in that mix. All right, we never know which game is going to mean the most to the playoff race at the end of the season. Last season, it was Chicago and Queen City. That was the game that everyone had to focus on Sunday night. So the question is, which one of these games do you think is going to matter the most heading down the stretch for the playoffs in Week 13 of this year? Let's start with Richards.
Well, I think back to Season 10 when, Indianapolis was struggling to get into the playoffs, and we had Sioux Falls towards the end of our schedule, and we ended up blanking them. And I'm predicting the same thing, so we'll see how it goes.
All right, James Klein.
I'm looking at Tulsa and Las Vegas. Both teams fairly new, but both of them's got good teams that's coming up. That's the matchup I'm looking at.
The interesting thing about that matchup is that Tulsa got off to a strong start in their first season. So did Las Vegas. Tulsa had a bad down year in the second year. What will happen to the Fury this go around? All right, Marcus, which matchup sticks out to you on the Week 13 slate?
So the one that sticks out to me is a little bit different. It's going to be the Houston at Alaska. And, this may not be determining who gets into the playoffs. It might only be determining seeding. but there's a lot of bad blood in this game. It's a rematch of the playoff game we had this season where Houston was eliminated by Alaska. And this could be the game that determines whether one of these teams slips down to a couple places in the seeding and whether somebody gets slipped in just ahead of them by, one team winning or losing this game. So that's what I'm looking forward to seeing, how this shakes up the top of the bracket at the end of the season.
So that's a look at Week 13, and that jumps us into team-by-team schedules according to the popularity of wanting to see schedules earlier today by reactions and SFL alerts. But we start with the back-to-back defending champions. How could we not? The Alaska Storm, a real breakdown of their schedule, if you will. Couple of road games late. The Queen City game, their toughest road game on the back end, but they do have an incredibly difficult road schedule at Tallahassee, at Baltimore, at Mexico City, at Queen City, to name 4 of the 6 on the road. We're going to go sort of around the horn on these team schedules to keep things flowing. If any analyst has something they really want to get out about a particular team, go right ahead. But James Richards going to toss it over to you to the defending champs schedule. How's it look, and what is most interesting?
I think this is arguably one of the toughest schedules next to the Baltimore and Tallahassee schedule. But you look at the teams they're taking on. Tallahassee week 2, Baltimore week 1. Sorry, I said that out of order. And then you have Baltimore again, Tallahassee, Mexico City, Chicago, Queen City. And the list goes on and on and on. They don't really have a week off. Even the weaker teams, and I use air quotes, even the weaker teams on the schedule can give in for their money any given week. So this is definitely one of the toughest schedules in the league.
Anybody else have any thoughts on the defending champs?
Well, majority of them are playoff teams from this previous season, so it's not going to be easy. I don't expect them to go undefeated, but Max Paul is probably the hardest working owner in the whole league, and if anybody could do it, it would be him.
Let's look at the Chicago Wildcats. They also start with 2 of 3 on the road, but look at this. Look at their march. 3 of 4 on the road, and 3 of them all of them are against playoff teams, but 3 road games against playoff teams in the month of March. Chicago better do work, and do work early. Marcus, is that what stands out, or is there another part of the schedule?
I think for Chicago, what stands out easily is the end where, they can't rely too much on, let's say, if they need to win out to get into the playoffs in the last month, that might not be in their favor going against Alaska, Houston, Mexico City, and Tallahassee. So, like you said, they really got to wrap up those wins earlier so that if they have to take some losses near the end of the season, they can do so. So it's a tough road, but Chicago has proved that they can put up with the best of the teams in the league.
Shan Varner says in the chat, "We got this, bro." So I think Chicago is feeling pretty good about it. Anybody else have some thoughts on the Wildcats slate?
Yeah, there's just really no room for them to breathe. They've got Queen City, Mexico City, Vancouver, New Orleans. If they can go 2-2 out of those 4 games, they kind of get a little relief. Not that Houston's relief, but then you take on London, Denver, Oklahoma City. If they can get out of that first half of their schedule, 4 wins in, maybe 3, but it gets real tough at the end. They've got to perform early, and they got to get out to a hot start.
All right, next up on the docket is the New Orleans Pharaohs, the next most requested ball club. And New Orleans, it's a bit rough early. 4 out of 5 on the road to start, including road games at Houston and Chicago, and of course the Atlanta game as well. But on the back end, they have 5 of 7 at home starting February 11th. And their only road games are to Tulsa, which is a relatively short road trip, and to Sioux Falls. So, James Klein, what's you got going for New Orleans?
I really like their schedule, to be honest, and I see them making the playoffs. I got 2 former coordinators and scouts there, and I expect them to do very well.
How about you, Marcus?
For this particular team, it's kind of the backward situation for what Chicago had. They start out with some of the tougher teams, 3 of those 4 were in the playoffs. Houston, Queen City, Chicago, Atlanta, we were just, under the playoffs, and then it picks up again mid-season going Las Vegas, Carolina, and Sioux Falls. And then it looks like they have if you look back on the way that the records were last season, you might say they have an easier end to the season going against Denver, Tulsa, Atlanta, London. But, they need to make sure that they get those wins early so that if somebody upsets them near the end, that they can still make it over the stretch into the playoffs.
New Orleans, slow start last year, but really picked it up there in the middle of the season and then lost a couple of tough ones on the chin to end their run. Next up is the Vancouver Legion, and their schedule is as follows. Vancouver, a pretty balanced schedule in terms of home and away games, sort of flip back and forth across the schedule. They have 2 back-to-back Sunday games, then 2 back-to-back Monday games, then 2 back-to-back Friday games, then 3 back-to-back Sunday games. So a little interesting how it falls. In the date category, they finish up again with 2 of those 3 games at Denver, and they actually finish up with 4 out of their last 5 against non-playoff opponents. Back to Richards on the breakdown of the Legion schedule.
Well, I think season 12 for the Legion's going to be the year of the Pepper. Tom Pepper re-signed in the offseason with Vancouver to be their general manager and quarterback for season 12. And historically, Vancouver's started out slow. Season 11, when they kind of limped into the playoffs, season 10, they limped into the playoffs. Then season 12, I believe am I saying this right? 10? No. Okay. Doesn't matter.
10, I think the 10
they gotta get strong. They gotta go out strong. Right. They've got to play strong early. They cannot get off to a slow start. And hopefully Tom Pepper is able to put this team in good position and get them back into the playoffs.
James, Marcus, thoughts on Vancouver's slate?
Vancouver. Sorry, James, go ahead.
You go ahead. I'll wait.
I was just going to say, Vancouver's got kind of a tough slate. The first half of their season is pretty rough. I'll not say Atlanta, that's my team. I don't want to show any bias, but they got Queen City, Chicago, Houston. New Orleans was pretty tough at the end of the season. Las Vegas made it to the playoffs, and Queen City. So they got this huge stretch of playoffs, and everybody was, just either playoffs or a game below the playoffs. So their whole first half of the season is a pretty rough way to start.
Yeah, I agree. I was looking at Baltimore's schedule earlier today, which you reveal it, and this compares to that to me.
All right, so that's a look at the Legion. We jump to the Dallas Lobos here in just a second. The Dallas Lobos, headed by Stephen Mullinex and Crash Combs, Ray West, all doing a great job over there in Dallas as they're looking to rebuild. And they begin with 3 of 4 on the road. Dallas's sort of meat and potatoes of the schedule is relatively balanced. Obviously, at Tallahassee in prime time is a difficult game. They do get Mexico City at home. They do get Carolina at home and traveling to Atlanta as well. Of course, Dallas finished next to last in the league. Will have the number 2 pick in the draft, so things a little bit lighter for them, but that bye doesn't come until week 12. Full analysis and breakdown. Let's start with Marcus.
Thanks, Cam. For Dallas, they really started to heat up at the end of the season and won a couple really tough games against Tallahassee and another team at the end of the year there. So their schedule is pretty balanced, but if they start out running like they did at the end of last season, they could tear through a lot of these teams: St. Louis, Tulsa, Oklahoma City, Denver, San Francisco. I wouldn't be surprised if, by the time they face Tallahassee, if they're undefeated. You never quite know in this league, and they really showed that they were a tough team at the end of the year. They do have an extremely balanced schedule, a couple tough games, but I think more so than not that this is a favorable schedule for Dallas.
Richards, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm going to have to agree with Marcus. I think it's a very balanced schedule. I think the real key here is, what does Dallas's offense do? There's been some talk that they may get away from the air raid attack that they made popular last season. And then 2, what improvements have they made on defense? This is one of the worst defenses in the league. We saw every game was a shootout. If they get away from the passing game, teams are still able to put up a ton of points. We could see this being a pretty tough schedule for Dallas.
All right, let's move on to the Tallahassee Pride, and they got one of those blistering schedules. Tallahassee, in particular, a lot of road games, but I first want to address and then let my panel do the rest. That 3 straight at home for Tallahassee, even though 2 of them are against playoff teams and they have a very difficult schedule. Those 3 in the comforts of the Lions' Den at home could make a big difference. Also, too, games at Sioux Falls and at Baltimore could produce some snow, even Alaska in Week 8. So, James Klein breaking down the Tallahassee Pride's slate. What stands out to you?
Well, the top half, most definitely all those road games against really good teams. And, you was talking about Dallas earlier. That's a revenge game. So, to me, that top half schedule is really actually pretty brutal.
Marcus, no Atlanta, Tallahassee this year. Tallahassee getting away from some rivals probably just for a season as you look around their schedule, but they do have first meetings against Las Vegas. They do get their chance to get revenge on Dallas, and then, they haven't played Baltimore in quite some time.
I really have been seeing purple in my nightmares, so I'm kind of glad not to have that going on anymore. But the last 2 games of the year, Tallahassee lost to Dallas and Houston. So this is probably going to be one of the tougher schedules that Tallahassee has had in some time. And, they're really going to have to prove themselves this season against Alaska, Las Vegas, Baltimore, Mexico City. They keep playing these really tough teams, these playoff teams. So, it makes you wonder, was it the competition that Tallahassee was playing last season, or were they really, really that good? And, they went through these teams in the playoffs, so they probably were really that good. But the Tallahassee Pride is going to get a challenge the likes of which they've never seen before this season.
So that's a look at the Tallahassee Pride. And now we go to one of the most unique schedules in SFL history, and that is the Tulsa Desperados. The Tulsa Desperados are the first team in league history to play 12 different opponents in a season. That's right, they play 12 different teams. And by the way, there are more matchups than ever before on the SFL schedule where teams only play once, which means that tiebreakers, head-to-head tiebreakers specifically, now matter more than ever. A look at Tulsa's schedule. They don't ever have more than 2 road or home games at a time, and their toughest slate in terms of road trips are 3 of 4 to end the season on the road, including a long trip to London to face the Knights for the first time. James Richards, your analysis of Tulsa.
I think that's a crucial point that you mentioned in warming this up, is they play 12 different teams. And so if they start dropping games to anybody, they're not going to have a chance later on in the season to tie up the series. And that could really tip the balance either way for them trying to rebound and get back into the playoffs.
James Klein, your thoughts on Tulsa?
That's even more scouting that they have to do. I mean, you're not facing the same person over and over. You're really going to have to pay attention to film and take a lot of notes.
And teams in the SFL play somewhere between 9 and 12 teams this season. Just depends on the schedule and how it all shook out. So that's a look at Tulsa. Tulsa goes to London this year. So what about those London Knights? London, very sort of bizarre schedule. They have a 4-game homestand late in the season. Denver, Tulsa, Vegas, Vancouver against just one playoff team. But you don't often see 4 straight home games on any team's schedule. They start with 3 of 4 on the road. Let's start with Marcus in his analysis of the Knights.
I think the Knights have, I'm not going to say an easy schedule, but I think they have a schedule that's a little bit easier than some. They play 4 teams that made it to the playoffs, and they're split out a bit. They have the games against Chicago and Houston in the middle of the season, and then they go on to face Las Vegas, and then they go against New Orleans, who almost made it at the end of the season. So those games are all pretty well spread out. They start against San Francisco, Denver, St. Louis, Indianapolis. I think this is an extremely balanced schedule, and I think more so than not that this is going to be work in their favor this season.
What do you think, Klein? Would you rather have a 4-game homestand with a bunch of road games, or would you rather have it balanced out?
Well, being at the end, I'd rather have those 4 at home. But I'm sort of disappointed that Eggplant Bowl 3 is not going to be played.
And the funny thing about the schedule, most people don't realize that when a schedule begins, you start with all of the matchups that you could ever dream of having on the schedule, and then as things move along and you have to format roster files certain ways and all sorts of stuff, games end up getting moved around, and some games just don't happen. And the Eggplant Bowl was one of those. I still forever will have pictures of Liam Crowder with the eggplant, and so we can always pop that up from time to time, and I'm sure London and Carolina will be running into each other next season. So that's a look.
Right.
That's a look at London. Let's switch gears to the Atlanta Swarm. The Atlanta Swarm. Atlanta, fairly balanced in terms of home and road. They actually are one of a few teams that only have one 2-game road trip. It's a tough one at Tulsa and at Sioux Falls, sandwiched there in the middle of the season. They play St. Louis the last week of the season. If you remember, St. Louis ruined an Atlanta opportunity for the playoffs a couple seasons back in the final week of the season, but this time it's at the Hive. We'll start with James Richards and his thoughts of the Swarm slate.
Well, I agree. I think it's a very balanced schedule, but then you look at week 11, 12, and 13. Neither 3 of these teams were playoff teams. So if Atlanta finds themselves in a similar situation where they're on the edge of whether being a playoff team or not, they can look forward to these 3 games at the end of the year that may allow them to get the push they need to get into the playoffs.
James Klein, in week 3, LB Allen is going to be taking on his former team, and he's already jumping for joy about that in the chat room.
Oh yeah, he's pumped about that, and I'm looking forward to it as well. I'd like to get a rivalry with him as well.
So that's a look at Atlanta. Let's go now to a schedule that many are saying might be the toughest in the SFL. The Baltimore Vultures. They start with 2 on the road, and actually they never play one game at home or on the road at any given time during the season. They play 2 on the road, then 4 at home. Baltimore and London, the only teams with 4-game homestands. 2 on the road, 2 at home, 2 on the road. They finish at Houston, at Queen City. And that 4-game homestand, pretty critical as Baltimore tries to make a statement to the rest of the SFL. Start with James Richards again here on this Vulture slate, having to take on just a lot of good competition.
Well, Baltimore certainly has the toughest schedule in the SFL. It's not arguable. It is the toughest schedule. They play Alaska twice. They play Queen City twice. They play Tallahassee twice. And then they got to play Mexico City, Houston, and Sioux Falls. So that's just, it's a murderous schedule. If they can somehow find a way to go 500 against Alaska, Tallahassee, and Queen City, or even take the series against one of those teams, I think they're putting themselves in very good position to make the playoffs just by strength of schedule alone.
What do you think, Marcus? Would you like to trade with the Vultures?
No, I don't think I would. I think I'd like to stay very far from that schedule as possible. And it looks like they only have 2 games against teams that weren't in the playoffs last season. So they got some really tough games, and they don't really have a lot of room to make any mistakes. Because if they start dropping these games, it could be very difficult for them to get them back. Baltimore is a very good team. They do have a chance to win these games, but any mistakes they make could potentially cost them a playoff run down the line if it gets to that point.
And I'd like to add something. Baltimore started out slow last season, and I think it was week 5, something like that, before they got their first win. If they start out slow with having those 4 home games in the first half, that's going to be trouble. But I have a feeling that they're going to probably start out pretty hot, so I think they'll be all right, even though they do have that tough schedule.
We'll find out what they're made of, and we'll find out soon what Indianapolis is going to look like as the Indianapolis somethings will be taking the field here in January. And here's a look at what Indianapolis's slate is going to look like. They are one of few teams that start with a couple of games at home, Denver and San Francisco. Some road games to San Francisco, some road games to Vegas, road game to Denver, road game to Alaska. It ended up being kind of a Western movement there for Indianapolis. Marcus, your first thoughts on Indianapolis's schedule here?
I like the schedule that Indianapolis has. They don't have Tom Pepper anymore, so they're probably they're going to be coming out with a new quarterback. Who knows what changes to the offense or defense they're going to make with this new branding. I see that they have a couple really tough games. They have those 2 weeks against Alaska and Baltimore that'll really challenge them. They have a lot of different games against a lot of different types of teams, and I think it's going to be a really good test for Indianapolis to see what kind of team they are as they go through these games.
4 out of your last 6 against playoff teams, James. We'll find out what you're made of, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I think we got to start out fast, and we got to keep it going. We got to keep the momentum rolling into week 7 and week 8. And if we can do that, then I think we'll be in good shape and putting ourselves in good position for the playoffs.
All right, next on the list, another team that's near and dear to the panel's heart. It's the Carolina Skyhawks. And the Skyhawks schedule looks like this. Hey, you lucked out. 3 straight at home. Not often you see that. Versus Mexico City, versus Houston, versus Atlanta, all fairly difficult teams. Carolina, one of 3 teams to have a bye the last week of the season, although with player progression that doesn't matter too much. But either way, James Klein, let me get your initial thoughts. You got 4 or 5 on the road in the middle there as well.
Yeah, and to me, it's a really tough schedule. I mean, every one of these teams are good, or they're up and coming, going to be really good. Like Dallas, and St. Louis, they're 2 teams that you don't take them lightly. Trust me, St. Louis, we took them lightly a couple seasons ago, and they made us pay.
James Richards, the at Queen City, at Mexico City sticks out to me there in back-to-back weeks. Carolina definitely trying to weather the storm in that stretch, right?
Well, I think, their first 7 games are against, pretty tough teams, and I don't envy them having to come out and, we talk about home field advantage. I think, a couple seasons ago we tracked it that the home team wins like 53 or 54% of the games. So there's really not a huge discrepancy between home and away. Yeah, there's a slight advantage. But man, those first 7 games are really tough ones, but if they somehow make it through that, 500 or better, you're looking at a good chance that the Skyhawks make it back to the playoffs.
I wanted to chime in on that really quick, if you don't mind.
Sure.
The interesting thing about this is not only the schedule being so tough, is how much Carolina has changed this season. They had their general manager go and retire, AJ Francis, their running back, their quarterback left. They had a couple other players leave, and they're going to have a whole new quarterback, running back, their new offensive and defensive coordinators. So this is going to be an entirely newly retooled team for the Skyhawks, and then they have to take that new team and put it against these really, really tough teams. So this is going to be quite the challenge for Carolina to go ahead and do.
We'll see if Carolina's in a position to make a run. New Orleans, Tulsa, Dallas, OKC, St. Louis, all on the back end of the schedule, an easier back end for them according to records from last season. The Mexico City Aztecs schedule looks like this. First off, Mexico City plays Carolina twice, so that's interesting. We failed to mention that Vancouver has an interesting schedule. They play Queen City twice and Denver twice. A bit of the opposite ends of the spectrum there for the Legion. For Mexico City, they end with 2 road games on the road. At Baltimore, well, 2, that's self-explanatory. I don't know what I'm saying. I had a great show up until that point. At Baltimore and at Chicago, 2 games in the final 10 days of the SFL regular season, but they got plenty of playoff teams throughout. Let's start with James Klein on his thoughts with Mexico City.
I actually think they're going to win it all this year. I mean,
really?
Yeah. Well, that logo is just amazing. So that's why I chose them. But no, really though, they're always going to be a team that's of interest, and I just think that they've really got a good shot this year.
All right, Marcus, you think Mexico City's going to win it all too?
I don't know if they're going to win it all, but they do have, I guess I'd sound like a broken record to say they got a tough schedule because the way this is balanced, all the teams that are in the playoffs from last season are going to have some really tough schedules. But, I liked what I saw out of that team. They definitely have a good shot to make it back to the playoffs.
Denver Nightwings say Mexico City's going 5-1 in the first 6 weeks. Carolina, Chicago, Houston, Atlanta, Carolina a second time, and then at St. Louis. All right, moving on to the Houston Hyenas. By the way, Damon Simeon going to be calling the Pro Bowl with me on Sunday. Looking forward to that. And T-Pat and Mighty squaring off in that game with their assistant coach as well. That's right around the corner, so make sure you watch that. Tune in for that Sunday night on Twitch TV. So for Houston, they've got 4 out of 5 on the road, weeks 2 through 6, have a bye week 9, 3 games at home late, but that schedule is nasty late. The only road game at Alaska, a team that obviously has been a bugaboo for them, but the other games they at least get at home. James Richards, thoughts on the Hyenas?
Yeah, this is definitely a really tough schedule as well. I think for Houston, their season depends on how well the middle to low tier teams do. If Carolina comes out hot and takes it week 2 against Houston, if Vancouver can turn it around with Tom Pepper, if Chicago can rebound and try to return to season 9 form, this could be a really grueling, tough schedule for Houston with very little breaks in between week to week.
What do you think, James Klein?
To me, that's just right below Baltimore's schedule as far as being tough. I know one thing: if Damon starts out slow, he'll be watching a lot of Cowboy games.
Well, unfortunately for him, it's the winter season, so he's going to be watching reruns, and I wouldn't wish that on anybody. Sioux Falls Sparrows is coming up next. The Sparrows playoff usual. They have a week 5 bye, play Las Vegas twice. 2 road games back-to-back at Queen City and at Vancouver. That's a lot of frequent flyer miles for Sioux Falls. They'll also go to Vegas, go to Baltimore. Some tough games on the road for the Sparrows. They end up finishing with Indianapolis. Marcus Dunhill, your thoughts on Sioux Falls?
I didn't get a really good look at Sioux Falls last season. They were in a different conference and they didn't mingle too much with people from my own conference. So I don't know a whole lot about them besides watching them in the playoffs last season where they did really well. They have a start where they have those 4 playoff teams, so that's a pretty rough start. But I think this is a team that can handle it. I think once you get through those first 4 games, you have a stretch where you can start racking up wins, and I think you can do pretty well on the back half of the season.
James Richards, what a sigh of relief that Sioux Falls, as they look at their schedule tonight, they do not have to go to Alaska, and they host them in week 4 and only play them once. That game could be huge to the playoff picture, but is there another one that stands out?
Well, I'm obviously a big fan of week 13, and last time we played them, towards the end of the season, we put it on them, and then we took that momentum and put it on San Antonio. Put them to rest. But I think Jason's one of the best owners in the league. He's been around for a long time. This isn't his first rodeo. I think AJ's really proved that he is a capable coach and general manager for the Sioux Falls Sparrows. So as tough as this schedule looks, I think those 2 individuals are primed and ready to take on such a grueling task.
The Denver Nightwings, led by Jeremy Vega, starts at Indianapolis, but 3 of their first 5 at home, and their first 5 against non-playoff teams. They do not play, and then they have a bye before they play at Chicago, so they don't play a playoff team until week 7 as Denver tries to turn things around. James Klein, your initial thoughts?
Jeremy, he's just so close, being his second season, so close to being one of those owners that you worry about making the playoffs. And he's got the schedule this year that I think he can do it. So, nobody sleep on them. I'll just tell you that right now.
What do you think, Marcus?
Denver's schedule, it looks fairly balanced. I don't see, they got a couple of those playoff teams from last season, but it looks like they only got 2 of them. So, it's definitely a doable season for Denver. They didn't have the greatest season last season, but I think with the favorable schedule, I think you'll see them a lot higher up in the rankings this season.
All right, we are moving down the list, and we're getting close to the end. Loving everybody here with us still in the chat. Let's look at Las Vegas. The Fury, 3 straight at home. Sioux Falls, Baltimore, Tallahassee. It's a tough start at Alaska in week 5. They do have a week 3 bye sandwiched in there, so they will play a home game against the Pride coming off of a bye. 4 of 5 on the road, weeks 8 through 12. Atlanta, Carolina, London, Sioux Falls. We'll start with James Richards.
Yeah, 1 through 6, all playoff teams. Week 7, 8 are teams that could have been playoff caliber and were really good and put it to some teams. So this is a pretty tough schedule as well. And I think Max Jackson and company can handle it, but it's really going to, put a lot to them in their second year. So we'll see how they fare.
Marcus, road games east at Georgia, at North Carolina, at the United Kingdom. This is a lot of flyer miles for Vegas at the back half of the season after a difficult first half on the field.
This is going to be a really rough test for Las Vegas. It's much tougher than the season or the schedule they had last season, but I really liked what I saw out of Las Vegas, and they really surprised me last season. I think they started off a little bit slow, and pardon the pun, but I didn't think they'd catch fire like they did near the end of the season. And if they continue with that, I am expecting very big things from Las Vegas this season, and I'm super excited to see what they're going to do.
The Oklahoma City Renegades up next. The Renegades start with 3 of 4 on the road. They also are at Carolina again, which is, it seems, James Klein, like Oklahoma City and Carolina somehow end up on the schedule like every season. It's unbelievable. So it's uncanny.
It is. It seems like it. And I tell you, I really like their schedule, to be honest. I think it's maybe their year that they're in the playoffs. The schedule's, it favors them, I believe.
3 games at home in weeks 5, 6, then they have a bye in week 7, and then at home again in week 8. So they don't leave Oklahoma City for a whole month, sandwiched in between San Francisco and London. Richard, your thoughts?
If Oklahoma City can start out, historically like they have the last few seasons, that just come out the gate firing on all cylinders. If they can make it to that home stretch, with some wins in their pocket, we could be looking at a playoff Oklahoma City Renegades team that we haven't seen in some time.
Marcus, we'll start with you and San Francisco. The Sharks have 3 of their first 4 at home, London, Denver, and Oklahoma City. But San Francisco's march is brutal. You want to start there, Marcus? Maybe? He's speechless. Let's go to James Klein, get his thoughts.
Yeah, I was looking at earlier. That's going to be tough, And the thing is I really want to see San Francisco do really well. And if they can get through March, they may be fine.
Go ahead, Marcus.
Sorry about that, Cam.
That's all right.
I was gonna say I feel really bad for San Francisco. This is a pretty tough season for a team last year that ended the season 3-9. They ended up drawing Baltimore, Mexico City, Alaska, and Tallahassee.
3 of the 4 on the road.
3 or 4 on the road. All 4 of those teams are playoff teams. The last 3 of them are all at the end of the year, and they didn't have the greatest season last year, and they have some really tough games ahead of them this season. So they really got to prove what they're made of this season.
And a good point made by Sean Harrelson in the chat. San Francisco and Oklahoma City renew the Sharknado series that they got cooking a couple of seasons ago. 2 teams are left on the docket to unveil. We start with the St. Louis Gladiators. James Richards will take the lead. 2 at home. with a week to start. Week 11 bye, and it's sandwiched in between that week 11 bye is 3 of 4 on the road. So St. Louis only has one home game after February 25th. Richard, your thoughts?
Yeah, they're going to have to start out fast, and hopefully this new look for their brand translates over into a new St. Louis. Historically, St. Louis has been one of the lower half of the teams. They got close to making the playoffs, I believe, in season 10, but ultimately fell short. Then season 11, they came back down to earth a little bit, performed historically like they normally do. So hopefully these guys, with some new blood coming into the franchise, a new look for their franchise, hopefully they find themselves reinvigorated, energized, ready to go, and hopefully they can make a push for the playoffs this year.
Mexico City and Tulsa, their two toughest schedules, and Carolina as well, on their slate are all at home, compared to road games at Atlanta, OKC, Indy, Dallas, Denver, London. Again, just going by the results from last season. I want to get all of your thoughts on the final team to break down, and that is, last but not least, the four-time champion, Queen City Corsairs. What do they got cooking? They end the season with 2 games at home, Alaska and Baltimore, 2 very difficult opponents. In fact, Queen City plays their last 4 games are against the teams that had the top 3 records in the SFL regular season last year. You can't get a tougher March than the one Queen City drew. And we'll start with Marcus.
Thanks, Cam. Yeah, they really got quite that tough schedule. The last 5 weeks of their season are against teams that made the playoffs last season. So that's a really rough March. Literally all 5 of those games are in March. They really got that first half where they need to excel in the first half of that season, rack up as many wins as they can, and then try their best against the 5 games at the end. But, Queen City is a really good team. I've always been a huge fan of theirs. And, it's not likely that they're going to lose all 5 of these games. They're going to put up a challenge for every single team they face. So I think this is definitely a good year for Queen City to make it back to the playoffs.
Klein, you're very familiar with the Corsairs. You have them in week 4, but Queen City usually known as a team that gets hot at the end of the season, but in the last couple of seasons, it's kind of been the opposite tale.
Well, I know when I seen that we was playing them again, I was like, oh, geez. But, overall, you look at that schedule, right there with Baltimore. And what I'm very curious to see what these teams' records are going to be at the end. Queen City, Baltimore, Tallahassee, and Alaska playing very tough competition. That's what I'm really interested to see.
And James Richards, your thoughts on Queen City?
Yeah, I think they're one of the better teams historically in the SFL. I also think their style of play allows them to match up extremely well against the top teams like Alaska, Tallahassee, and Baltimore, and even Sioux Falls. The way they run the ball is really a sight to see. And not only that, but if you game plan too much towards their run game, they've proven to have quite a lethal passing game. So really tough team. I'm glad to not have them on my schedule this year. And best of luck to them, and I think they'll be a playoff team.
All right, that is the breakdown of all 21 teams. What a fantastic job by our panel. Having a lot of fun here tonight. That is the Season 12 schedule. We'll get one last final thought from each of our panelists. Thanks to everyone who has tuned in tonight on Twitch TV. We're going to kick it off with Marcus Dunhill. Just an overarching thought of the schedule or the season that you'd like to mention.
So I guess the overarching thing that I'd like to say is this is probably the most unique schedules all our teams have ever had. And I'm super excited for that. Half the teams Atlanta's going to face are teams I hadn't personally never played before. So I'm excited for that. I'm sure a lot of these teams are. There's a lot bigger shift in balance for these seasons where these tougher teams that made it to the playoffs last year are going to have a lot of tough roads to go back. But I'm excited to see what this greater level of challenge means for all these teams. So I think this is probably going to be the best season for watching SFL football we've probably ever had.
And you said that Atlanta plays 7 new opponents this season?
6, I believe.
6 new opponents. That's a lot. James Klein, your overarching thoughts on the season 12 schedule?
Well, there's 21 teams in the league. This is a 21-gun salute to me. You look at every team has a challenge. It's not really to me, it's not a cupcake schedule for anybody because the competition's pretty balanced. You're going to see, mark my word, you're going to probably see about 7 or 8 teams battling for that 10th spot in the playoffs, and it's going to be tight.
James Richards, you have the last word.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of parity across the league. You know, we saw a lot of teams do some great stuff last season. Now the new, the one, you know, large conference and everybody kind of plays everybody. I think that's going to lend itself to increasing the parity in the league. So we should see a lot more challenges, you know, better games across the league as a whole. And I can't wait to see the Indy somethings get back to the playoffs.
Hopefully we'll have that announcement soon. Also, Tallahassee is next due up to have their reveal launched. Well, it's been one heck of a night on Twitch TV. For Marcus Dunhill, James Klein, James Richards, I'm Cameron Irvine. Your schedule is out. You will receive your team schedule in your team locker rooms. And everyone have a great night. Good night, everybody.